Ever made a decision in a split second that turned out to be surprisingly accurate? That's what Malcolm Gladwell calls thin slicing in his book Blink: The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. Thin slicing is our brain's incredible ability to use limited information from a narrow window of experience to draw a conclusion. It's like the mental equivalent of creating a detailed sculpture out of a single block of marble. With just a few quick strokes, we carve out a perception or decision that often proves to be astonishingly accurate. Imagine you're a doctor faced with a malpractice suit. You've got a split second to make a judgment that could potentially save a life or end a career. In such high-pressure situations, experts often rely on thin slicing. Their years of experience and training allow them to quickly assess the situation and make a decision, even when they only have a sliver of information to work with. Or consider a more everyday situation. You meet someone for the first time, and within seconds, you formed an impression of them. You're not consciously processing every detail of their appearance or behavior. Instead, your brain is thin slicing, using the limited information available to make a snap judgment about this person. But it's not just about forming judgments about people or situations. Thin slicing also allows us to read emotions instinctively. Just by looking at someone's face, we can often tell what they're feeling. This ability to mind read is another example of thin slicing in action. These examples show how thin slicing can be a powerful tool, enabling us to make quick and often accurate decisions. But it's not always a foolproof method. After all, our snap judgments are influenced by our own biases, preferences, and experiences. And sometimes they can lead us astray, so it appears our minds can make accurate snap judgments. But what happens when these judgments go awry? What if our unconscious biases interfere with our ability to thin slice accurately? An intriguing question, isn't it? It's a sobering thought that even our rapid-fire unconscious mind isn't always the paragon of perfection we'd like to believe it is. In his book, Malcolm Gladwell delves into the pitfalls of thin slicing, one of which is the interference of our unconscious biases. He discusses the concept of psychological priming, a phenomenon where exposure to a stimulus influences a response to a later stimulus. For instance, if we're primed with the idea that a particular group of individuals is untrustworthy, our responses to individuals from that group may be unconsciously biased. We might misinterpret innocent actions as suspicious because our minds were primed to expect devious behavior. This is where the implicit association test, or IAT, comes into play. The IAT is a tool that measures the strength of a person's subconscious associations or biases. It's a sort of mental litmus test, revealing the often surprising biases lurking beneath our conscious awareness. For example, you may consciously believe in equality across races, but the IAT might reveal unconscious biases you weren't even aware of. It's a tool that highlights the disconcerting fact that our unconscious mind can sometimes sabotage our ability to thin slice effectively. Another pitfall is the influence of stereotypes on our thin slicing ability. Stereotypes, which are oversimplified, generalized beliefs about a certain group, can cloud our judgment. If we stereotype a group as being lazy, for instance, we might unconsciously judge an individual from that group as lazy too, even if their actions suggest otherwise. This isn't to say that thin slicing is inherently flawed, quite the contrary, but it does underscore the point that it's not a foolproof process. Our unconscious mind is a potent tool, but it's not immune to errors and biases. We must be aware of these potential pitfalls and strive to mitigate their influence to improve our thin slicing abilities. As we can see, even our unconscious mind isn't infallible. It's a humbling realization, but one that can empower us to make better, more informed decisions. After all, knowing our weaknesses is the first step to overcoming them. Does more information always lead to better decisions? This question brings us to the concept of information overload and the ensuing analysis paralysis. In an era where we're inundated with data at every turn, it's easy to assume that the more information we have, the better our decisions will be. But is that really the case? Consider the surgeon in the throes of a complex operation, the military strategist on the brink of a critical maneuver, or even the investor deciding where to put their money. Each has access to vast amounts of information, but does it all help? Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Blink, suggests otherwise. He argues that experts often make better decisions with snap judgments than they do with volumes of analysis. This phenomenon is known as thin slicing, the ability to find patterns and make decisions based on narrow windows of experience. But how does this tie in with information overload? Imagine you're given a 1,000-piece puzzle but with no box cover to guide you. You have all the pieces, all the information, but the sheer volume of it is overwhelming. Trying to process it all can lead to what is often referred to as analysis paralysis, a state of overthinking where decision-making becomes difficult, if not impossible. Now let's say you're given just a handful of puzzle pieces along with the box cover. You have less information, but this time you can start making connections, seeing the bigger picture. Gladwell suggests that this is how experts operate when making snap judgments. They're able to cut through the noise, focusing on the most critical information. Collecting more information may reinforce our judgment, but not necessarily make it more accurate. It's like adding more and more spices to a dish. At some point, the original flavor gets lost, and the dish becomes unpalatable. Similarly, the addition of excessive information can cloud our judgment, leading us astray from the right decision. So sometimes less is more when it comes to making decisions. It's not about having all the information, but knowing which information to use. So if thin slicing is such a powerful tool, how can we improve it? Let's dive in. At the core of intuitive judgment are three central elements: experience, training, and knowledge. These are the building blocks that shape our ability to thin slice, to make rapid, unconscious decisions based on limited information. Think of it like this. Experience is our unconscious mind's database. Every situation we encounter, every decision we make adds a new entry. This database becomes the foundation upon which our intuitive judgments are built. Training, on the other hand, is the process of fine-tuning this database. It's about learning to differentiate the relevant from the irrelevant, the significant from the trivial. Training helps us filter through the noise, allowing us to focus on the information that truly matters. Knowledge is the final piece of the puzzle. It's the conscious counterpart to experience and training. Knowledge provides context. It helps us understand the why behind our intuitive judgments. Now let's consider the halo effect, an example from the book. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where our impression of someone in one area influences our opinion of them in other areas. In the case of Warren G. Harding, his appearance of respectability influenced Henry Doherty's perception of him, leading to his support and eventual election as President of the United States. This example illustrates how our intuitive judgments, while powerful, can also be influenced by unconscious biases. Even individuals who aren't consciously prejudiced can still operate with prejudice at an intuitive, unconscious level. So, how do we improve our thin slicing abilities? By continually expanding our experiences, refining our training, and enhancing our knowledge. By being aware of the potential for bias and making a conscious effort to challenge our own assumptions and prejudices. Our experiences and knowledge shape our thin slicing abilities, sometimes in ways we might not even realize. So let's keep learning, let's keep growing, and let's continue to harness the power of thin slicing to make better, more informed decisions. But what happens when thin slicing leads to disastrous outcomes? Consider the tragic case of Amadou Diallo. In 1999, Diallo, an innocent man, was shot 19 times on his own doorstep by 4 New York policemen. This horrific incident is a stark example of how our rapid intuitive judgment, or thin slicing, can go terribly wrong. The officers involved in the Diallo case were experienced, trained, and knowledgeable, and yet their split-second decision led to a catastrophic result. Their snap judgment, heavily influenced by unconscious biases and prejudices, turned a routine interaction into a deadly encounter. Let's dissect this a little further. The policeman's thin slicing caused them to perceive Diallo as a threat, despite having limited information at hand. They didn't have the time, or perhaps didn't take the time, to gather more data, to ask questions, or to consider other possibilities. Instead, they relied on their immediate gut reactions. Their thin slicing, in this instance, was marred by implicit biases, stereotypes, and fears. This is not to say that the officers consciously intended to harm an innocent man. Rather, it highlights how our unconscious mind, with all its inherent biases, can dictate our actions, especially in high-stress, high-stakes situations where quick decisions are required. It underscores the importance of recognizing and challenging these biases, both at an individual and societal level. Moreover, it illuminates the dangerous side of thin slicing. Yes, it can help us make quick, effective decisions. Yes, it can cut through the noise of information overload. But as the Diallo case shows, it can also lead us astray. It can make us act on assumptions, on stereotypes, on fears rather than on facts. In conclusion, thin slicing is a powerful tool, one that we use every day, often without even realizing it. But like any tool, it must be used with caution and awareness. It's not infallible, and it can be influenced by our subconscious mind in ways we might not expect. As powerful as thin slicing can be, it's clear that it comes with its own set of challenges and pitfalls.